Hi again. We have reached Bready chapter 4 in this Freedom Whence. His new chapter is entitled Politics, Penal Code and Prisons. He starts with 3 short quotes about the state of England in the first half of the 18th century. First from J.W. Judwine, Religion, Commerce and Liberty, from 1683 to 1795. Judwine says, as each faction supplanted the other, they arranged the shift by providing the retiring official with a pension or a title or both. Their use of the revenues of the country to fill their own pockets is too large a subject for any one volume. So that's Judwine's summary of the politicians of the age. Morault wrote this in Letters on the English Nation, this is around 1730, about criminals. Morault says, the criminals pass through the streets in carts, dressed in their best clothes, and white gloves and nosegays, if it be the season. Those that die merrily, or that don't at least show any great fear of death, are said to die like gentlemen. And to merit this encomium, most of them die like beasts, without any concern, or like fools, having no other view than to divert the crowd. And then finally from John Wesley's journal, February 3rd, 1753. John Wesley says, I visited one in Marshalsea Prison, a nursery of all manner of wickedness. O shame to man, that there should be such a place, such a picture of hell upon earth. And then Bready starts his chapter this way. Politics, Penal Code and Prisons. Often it is assumed that the period of notorious political bribery and corruption began with Walpole. Lecky, that great social historian, by the way, who he'll reference throughout this chapter and beyond, Lecky, however, points out that the systematic corruption of members of Parliament began under Charles II, that is the Restoration, years before, in whose reign it was practiced to the largest extent. It continued both under James II and after the Revolution of 1688, and by the Septennial Act of the First Parliament of George I, which doubled the life of governments. Its powers of mischief were enhanced. To Walpole, nonetheless, was left the shameful distinction of making bribery and corruption a persistent and consistent policy of state. The first Prime Minister of Britain, he vied with any Stuart sovereign in the misuse of government funds and places for the maintenance and augmentation of personal power. Once scanning a gathering of members of Parliament, he observed, all these men have their price. That conjecture, unfortunately, was far too true, and on it he molded his policy. And his first subhead is Walpole and the Whig Oligarchy. Government, Walpole believed, must be sustained either by corruption or force, and the former he chose as the basis of his rule. Sleeping dogs he let lie, but if they awoke barking, he was always ready with a meaty bribe. He bribed George II by obtaining for him a civil list exceeding by more than £100,000 a year that of his father. He bribed the Queen by securing for her a jointure of £100,000 a year when his rival Sir Spencer Compton could only promise £60,000. His immense expenditure of Secret Service money went chiefly to buying rotten and pocket boroughs and to the upkeep of political jobbers and henchmen. During his long administration, a large percentage of the members of Parliament were secret pensioners or placemen, while variegated bribes were also resorted to in the House of Lords, where means were found of keeping even the bishops in control. In 1733, in 2 critical divisions of the upper house, Walpole actually was saved from defeat by the fact that out of 26 bishops, 25 were present or voted by proxy, of which 24 were for the court. Again, on February 20th, 1739, Walpole carried a critical division of the Commons by 262 votes against 235. Among those who voted for the government, it has been discovered, were 234 placemen, whose employment was worth £212,000. In one revealing sentence, Lecky depicts the crassness of Walpole's political strategy and its danger to any free people. Lecky says, quote, "It was his settled policy to maintain his parliamentary majority, not by attracting to his ministry great orators, great writers, great financiers, or great statesmen, not by effecting any combination or coalition of parties, by identifying himself with any great object of popular desire, or by winning to his side young men in whose character and ability he could trace the promise of future eminence, but simply by engrossing borough influence and extending the patronage of the crown." End of Lecky quote. Walpole was the arch political expression of his deistic, slave-trading age. As he said of himself, he was no saint, no reformer, no Spartan. He might have said much more. In his person and policy, the prevailing natural philosophy bore its natural fruit. The pursuit of self-interest was to him the law of nature, though he left it to the state prelates and economists to adorn it and call it the law of God. Nature to Walpole connoted not divine ordinance, but human appetites, and natural rights to him spelled self-aggrandizement, unabashed. Ruthless materialism and laissez-faire economics, therefore, were the habitual molds of his thought and expression, which withal were metallic and vulgar. Wittingly or unwittingly, Walpole mentally was a child of Machiavelli and of Mandeville. His personal habits, too, were as sensual as his mind was coarse. He was given to drunkenness and gluttony. He lived in open adultery, and having a positive taste for obscenity, the gross sensuality of his conversation was conspicuous in one of the coarsest periods of English history. This lewdness he carried not only into public life, but into court, where he jested with the disillusioned and cynical Queen Caroline, even on the infidelity of her husband, the king. I'll put a link into Jonathan Edwards, a nice contrast to all of this. Why is Jonathan Edwards, that great American theologian of this very same period, why is he ignored by the Watchtower?